My mother-in-law used her hospital power to destroy me. She thought I would stay silent like the others, but this time it was her own son, the one who once stood by her, who did this. Sit down and listen to the full story of my mother-in-law and me. I froze for half a second, just long enough for the door to swing shut behind me with a quiet click and for my stomach to drop like I'd missed the last step on a staircase. Evelyn Monroe, my mother-in-law, sat at the far end of the glass-paneled room, perfectly composed in a slate-gray suit, pen balanced between two fingers like a scepter. She nodded at me once, as if we were strangers meeting in a crosswalk. That smile didn't touch her eyes. I had asked Mark twice last night, just to be sure, if his mother was involved in the Harper Fellowship selection this year. He said no. She had supposedly recused herself. Too close to you. Conflict of interest. He'd shrugged, already halfway asleep. I'd believed him. Now she was here. Dr. Monroe, the committee chair greeted me. Please begin whenever you're ready. I adjusted the strap of my bag and walked to the head of the room. My presentation file loaded on the wall screen. My hands weren't shaking, but my spine had locked tight like a rusted hinge. I was aware of Evelyn's gaze, trained not on the slides but on me, measuring. Not a word yet, not a single objection, but her presence already rewrote the rules. I launched into my case study. A high-acuity patient with multi-organ dysfunction and a rare immune response. I'd led the diagnostic team, managed the treatment course, and documented every stage meticulously. It was the most demanding case of my residency. I knew the numbers cold, until Evelyn interrupted. Dr. Monroe, she said, voice velvet smooth. Regarding your day 3 labs, what was the rationale for delaying the second-line biologic? I paused. That wasn't in the file. Not in the submitted version, at least. There was a brief concern about renal absorption, I replied. The pharmacy recommended a taper, and the patient responded well. She raised an eyebrow. Interesting. The chart notes indicated the patient had already stabilized by day 2. Would you say the delay in treatment was cautious or hesitant? The air thickened. No one else on the panel spoke. I heard the echo of that word, hesitant, bounce around my ribs. Clinical judgment, I said. Grounded in lab data and team consensus. She nodded once more, jotting something in her notebook. Another committee member glanced sideways at her, then down at his laptop. When my presentation ended, the chair thanked me and said the decision would be finalized in 2 days. I smiled politely and left the room. Outside, I didn't breathe until I reached the stairwell. I leaned against the cold concrete wall, staring at the exit sign glowing red above the landing. My body was in fight or flight. My mind was in rewind. Later that evening, I checked the email archive for my original fellowship application, just to be sure everything had gone through correctly. That's when I saw the timestamp. The rejection letter from Harper had been auto-generated 3 days ago, 3 days before that meeting. I blinked at the screen. The cursor pulsed in the corner like a heartbeat. I reread the header. We regret to inform you. And then again. 3 days. Before the committee had even convened. Before I walked into that room and smiled through Evelyn's performance. It wasn't a decision. It was a formality. That night, Mark got home late. He was distracted, talking about a difficult surgery consult. I didn't bring it up. I didn't ask why his mother had lied. I didn't ask if he knew. I just made us pasta and smiled through the silence. The next morning, I arrived early for rounds. I checked my patient notes, resynced my work tablet, and pulled up the chart Evelyn had referenced during the meeting. It was the same patient, the one I'd presented. Day 3, lab values, pharmacology notes. But something didn't add up. I opened the metadata log. The note Evelyn had quoted, the one questioning my delay in treatment, had been edited. Time-stamped 2:17 a.m. 3 days ago. Modified under Dr. Evelyn Monroe's login. If they're willing to rewrite my chart, how many others have they erased? The question lodged itself behind my ribs and stayed there, breathing with me as I made my way through the hospital's east wing. I walked past glass offices where physicians tapped on keyboards and patients waited behind beige privacy curtains. The world moved on like nothing was wrong, like the truth wasn't being quietly overwritten, one line of medical code at a time. My reassignment had come that morning. No warning, no explanation. Just a cheery email from the department coordinator that said I'd be spending the next 2 weeks assisting in the rehab ward. A chance to decompress and focus on transitional care. It read, like it was a gift. It wasn't. They'd stripped me of my primary caseload overnight. No complex diagnostics, no lead rounds, just charting vitals and confirming medication compliance for patients already on the mend. I wasn't being punished, officially, but I'd been shelved. I didn't cry. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I found Jason. His office was tucked beside the stairwell that smelled faintly of burned coffee and plastic gloves. He looked up from his screen when I knocked, surprised but not unwelcoming. "I need to ask you something," I said, standing in the doorway, "and I need you to promise you'll keep it between us." He leaned back in his chair. "You're making it sound dramatic. I like that." I didn't smile. Jason closed his laptop and gestured to the chair across from him. "Okay, I'm listening." I told him everything. About Evelyn being on the committee, about the chart edit, about the metadata showing her login, time-stamped days before the hearing. I kept my voice level, clinical. But something in my chest felt like it was fraying. Jason didn't interrupt. When I finished, he steepled his fingers under his chin and asked, "You ever look at the server backups?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" Each note has a shadow log. Not what the EHR shows us, but what the system stores on the back end. It's not easy to access. Needs admin clearance or a security proxy. But I've got a tool. He opened a folder on his desktop and clicked something I couldn't see from my angle. I built it after. Well, let's just say I stopped trusting the surface data a while ago, he said, a little too casually. There was a pause between us. Not hostile, just full of things unsaid. Jason finally looked up. "You think Evelyn's done this before?" "I think she's not sloppy enough for this to be a first offense." He nodded. "Give me the chart ID and leave me half an hour." I spent the next 35 minutes pacing the hallway near the east stairwell, pretending to check emails, pretending my life wasn't unraveling thread by thread. When Jason emerged, he didn't say anything right away. He handed me a printout. There were 4 entries highlighted in red, each from a different patient, each accessed within hours of evaluation meetings, all from Evelyn's login. "This isn't a one-off," he said. "She's been doing this for years." I stared at the page, the weight of it heavier than I expected. "How do we prove intent?" Jason shrugged. "We don't. Not yet. But patterns matter." I flipped the page. The last chart was dated from 2015. A name jumped out at me. Lydia Whitmore. I didn't recognize it at first. But when I clicked into her record later that night, a cold shiver ran through me. She was a participant in one of Evelyn's published studies, a case that ended in sudden death due to unforeseen complications. But here, in the log, her progress note had been entered 8 hours after her recorded time of death. 8 hours. The note was brief. "Patient alert, tolerating fluids. No signs of distress." I checked the signature at the bottom. It didn't match any of the other entries in her file. I printed the scanned version and brought it to Jason. He squinted at the handwriting, then looked up at me. "That's not Lydia's handwriting," he said, voice low. "And that's not your average oversight." The hospital gave her an award that year. I think what she really earned was silence. Lydia Whitmore's name echoed louder in my head the deeper I dug. Her file was like a room someone had tried to renovate just enough to look normal. Clean surfaces, neat timestamps, but cracks in the walls if you looked closely. The autopsy wasn't there. No toxicology summary. No final discharge note. Just the tolerating fluids line, forged in someone else's hand. My mother-in-law's hand, if I trusted my instinct, and Jason's pattern analysis. I sat in the archive's sub-basement with a mug of bitter coffee and an overhead light that buzzed when it flickered. Rows of boxed research files lined the walls like the bones of old careers. This wasn't the electronic records system. This was where the bodies were buried. Figuratively, and maybe in Lydia's case, almost literally. The award Evelyn had won was the Rothstein Clinical Excellence Medal, given the same quarter Lydia died. A polished plaque hung in the third-floor hallway, right outside the conference room where my fellowship had been quietly torched. In the photo, Evelyn wore a pale silk blouse and a look of solemn dignity. No mention of the study's subject that went silent a week before the journal was submitted. I pulled the 2015 trial folder from storage. It wasn't digitized. Still paper charts and hand-labeled tabs. I flipped through them slowly. Test results. Consent forms. Protocols. Notes that read more like PR statements than scientific logs. Then I found it. A copy of Lydia's signed consent. Not a scan. A physical form. The signature on it didn't match the one from her ER admission 6 months prior. Not even close. This one was neat, stylized. The earlier one was jagged, rushed. Someone in pain. The writing wasn't hers. I took a photo with my phone, then carefully refiled the document. My fingers were trembling slightly. It was one thing to suspect something. It was another to hold it. I emailed the photo to Jason with no caption. Less than 5 minutes later, he replied, "Meet me in the back stairwell." Now he was already there when I arrived, pacing with the nervous energy of someone who wanted to break news before it broke him. "I remembered Lydia," he said, holding out his phone. "There was a nurse back then, Maya Beltran. She left the hospital suddenly, right after the trial ended. No notice, no forwarding contact. So, I found her. She's working at a clinic in Oregon now. I reached out on a throwaway email. Told her I was reviewing an old case, didn't say whose. She wrote back in 10 minutes. He turned the screen toward me. I read the message slowly. We were told not to document the adverse event. Evelyn said it would ruin the study's credibility. I couldn't stay after that. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. A tight pressure wrapped around my ribs. I couldn't tell if it was rage or relief. Jason lowered his voice. This is enough to make them look. Not necessarily act, but look. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Evelyn's questions from the committee room. How calm she'd been. How surgical. She'd destroyed opportunities for years and done it with enough precision to pass every audit. But now, finally, the data she didn't control was catching up. I sat on the floor of my apartment with open folders spread around me like the pieces of a broken engine. I printed out the note from Maya, attached the metadata logs, labeled each file with hospital standard naming conventions, just to make sure no one could claim confusion. Then I opened my laptop and navigated to the internal reporting portal, whistleblower channel, ethics committee. They required hospital ID, department, digital signature. There was a pull-down menu for nature of concern. I selected falsification of records. I uploaded the files. Then I paused. My cursor hovered over the final button. For a second, I thought about Mark, about what it would mean if his mother fell, if I was the one who pushed her. Then I thought about Lydia. Claire opens her laptop and clicks Submit Report. On the screen, confidential whistleblower form, ethics committee. The first time Evelyn erased a life, she got an award. The second time, she tried to erase mine. I didn't expect a reply right away. Ethics complaints don't cause fireworks. They trigger paperwork, slow phone calls, cautious whispers. But within 48 hours of clicking submit, I was called into a private meeting with Dr. Miriam Clark, the head of the hospital's internal review committee. The email arrived at dawn. No subject, just a time. 8:15 a.m. The message was curt and clinical, as if I'd missed a lunch shift rather than detonated a grenade under someone's career. Dr. Clark's office was on the 11th floor, behind frosted glass that muffled even the sound of its own importance. When I entered, she gestured for me to sit, her expression unreadable. "I've reviewed the materials you submitted," she said, folding her hands over a single manila folder. "They are troubling." I didn't speak. "You've made serious allegations against a department chair. That alone carries weight. But the documentation, if accurate, may indicate long-standing ethical breaches." "Everything I sent is real," I said quietly. She nodded. "That's what concerns me." There was a long pause. Her fingers tapped once against the folder's spine. "Be aware," she said finally, "that retaliation in this institution is subtle. You won't be fired. You'll be repositioned, isolated, discredited. You've already started to see that, haven't you?" I said nothing. "I've seen this before," she continued, "just not with her." I left her office with my heart beating in places it didn't belong. My throat, my wrists, my stomach. She hadn't promised protection. Only that the board would convene. Only that the documents would be read. That afternoon, while reviewing charts in the rehab ward, a notification blinked onto my screen. "New complaint filed, code of conduct, pending review." My name was in the subject line. I opened the attachment with hands like ice. The complaint claimed I had created an unsafe emotional environment for patients and demonstrated ongoing insubordination. It was unsigned but had been entered under the HR protocol for faculty-supervised incidents. No names, just shadows. Jason found me an hour later in the stairwell near radiology, the one where cell signals barely reached. "You saw it?" he asked. I nodded. "She's trying to bury me under counterclaims." "She did the same thing to me," he said, sliding a file from his messenger bag. 4 years ago, I spoke out about a flawed trial protocol. 2 weeks later, I was accused of violating confidentiality. They couldn't prove it, but I lost my research funding for a year. He opened the folder. Inside was a printed email, dated March 2019, sent from Evelyn's personal account to the dean's office. The subject line: "Concerns regarding professional boundaries, Dr. Jason Patel." It was the same playbook, different page. "This is systemic," I whispered. "She doesn't just retaliate, she rewrites the story." Jason's jaw clenched. "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." We agreed to meet again that night, but not in the hospital. It was too visible, too easy to trace. Instead, we drove to a half-lit parking garage 3 blocks away. The top floor was empty, open to the chill of early spring, the wind sharp and clean. Jason brought a portable drive. "This has everything," he said. "Raw logs, internal timestamp differentials, all the discrepancies in her login metadata. Use it however you want." I took it, unsure whether to feel gratitude or nausea. "Why help me now?" I asked. "Because you're doing what I didn't. Because if she gets away with it again, it's not just your name she'll burn. It's the next Lydia." And the next a soft sound behind us made me turn. A woman in nursing scrubs stood near the concrete ramp, half in shadow. I recognized her vaguely. Geriatrics unit, maybe? She approached slowly, eyes wide, like she wasn't sure whether to speak or vanish. "I heard what you're doing," she said quietly. "You should know. You're not the first. But you might be the last if you stay standing." Then she walked away. Neither Jason nor I said anything for a long time. When I returned to my apartment, I checked my inbox one more time before bed. There it was. A new calendar invite. Subject line: Internal Medicine Conduct Review, May 3rd, 9 a.m. She walked into the room like it belonged to her. I walked in like I knew the walls were finally listening. The hearing room wasn't much larger than the average ICU conference space. Glass windows, gray carpet, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look a little more tired, a little more human. A single long table stretched across the room with 5 seats arranged in judgment. 2 on the left for the defense, 2 on the right for me and my witness. The fifth, centered and elevated slightly behind a darker wood panel, was for the committee chair. Evelyn sat with perfect posture, legs crossed at the ankle, fingers interlaced on the table like she was offering a seminar. She wore a navy dress suit and pearl earrings, the kind of ensemble that whispered dignity without screaming wealth. When I entered, she didn't look at me. Just a slight tilt of her head. Regal, bored. Dr. Clark gavelled the room to order with a sharp knock of a palm against wood. Today's hearing concerns internal allegations of professional misconduct, falsification of medical records, and suppression of ethical review procedures. The committee acknowledges the severity of these claims and expects all parties to maintain decorum. The first 30 minutes were procedural. Clark read my submission into the record. Evidence files logged. Timeline of events. My name. My credentials. Evelyn's full academic title. Director of Internal Medicine and Senior Advisor for Clinical Research at Boston Central University Hospital. She looked utterly unbothered. When it was my turn, I stood and faced the panel. My voice didn't shake. I told them about the altered metadata on patient charts, about the inconsistencies in consent forms. I presented a timeline, Evelyn's login, the edits, the patient deaths. I didn't dramatize. I didn't speculate. I let the numbers speak. Then I handed over the printed email from Nurse Beltran in Oregon. Her testimony was brief, but damning. We were asked not to report the adverse outcome. I left because I couldn't stomach what happened. Next came Jason. He walked to the front without notes, without flash. Just his laptop and a quiet presence that somehow made the room lean in. He displayed audit logs on the screen. Colored graphs of login activity, time intervals, version discrepancies. He explained how Evelyn's account had overridden chart data at statistically improbable hours, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., often the night before evaluation boards. The same pattern, year after year. She's rewriting clinical reality, he said simply. From the corner of my eye, I saw Evelyn finally move. Just a shift of her jaw. A blink too slow. Then came the counter. Dr. Adams, one of the senior committee members and a longtime colleague of Evelyn's, leaned forward, fingers laced. Dr. Monroe, he said, addressing her directly. How do you respond to these accusations? Evelyn turned to face him, her expression the same one I'd seen during family holidays when I burned the potatoes or wore a dress she didn't approve of, calmly disappointed. I have spent 37 years in this institution, she began. I've mentored over 100 residents, authored 22 peer-reviewed studies, and received the Rothstein Medal for Clinical Excellence. I do not forge data. I do not need to. A pause, a look around the room. What I do need, she continued, is for people in emotionally vulnerable positions not to weaponize institutional systems in an attempt to explain their own professional disappointments. It wasn't a defense. It was a dismissal. She wasn't arguing the facts. She was questioning my right to have brought them. I stood again. With respect, I said. If 37 years of reputation can erase scrutiny, then we don't need ethics boards. We need statues. Dr. Clark looked at me. Is there anything else, Doctor? Monroe? I nodded. Jason opened the final file. A memo, dated 2015, never filed formally. A note from Evelyn to the study's senior coordinator, handwritten, recovered from internal archives. On it were 4 words. Scrub Lydia. Do not escalate. Evelyn stared at it, her expression finally shifting. Not panic, something quieter. Recognition, like she'd forgotten the world still kept carbon copies. This wasn't a mistake, I said. This was premeditated silence. The room went still. No one spoke for a long beat. Then Dr. Clark stood, hands folded in front of her. This committee will reconvene in private and render judgment within 24 hours. She built a throne from silence. I pulled one truth, and the whole thing cracked. The decision came the next morning, tucked inside a sealed envelope and hand-delivered by hospital security. No dramatic meeting, no televised statement. just institutional language printed on high-weight paper. Doctor. Evelyn Monroe is hereby suspended from all supervisory and evaluative duties pending external investigation. Effective immediately. No fanfare. No cameras. No apologies. But her nameplate disappeared from the third-floor office by noon. I sat at my usual desk in the rehab wing, charting the recovery progress of an elderly stroke patient who liked to hum off-key while I changed his IV. There was something oddly calming about it. After everything, I still liked being a doctor. That surprised me. At 11:46 a.m., an all-staff bulletin went out. A quiet ripple spread through the hospital. Effective May 4th, any chart alterations will now require a dual authentication system and cross-review for timestamp edits. New ethics audit protocols in place. It didn't say her name, but we all knew. Around lunch, I received a message from the fellowship committee. They were reopening my application, offering me the spot, this time under a different advisor. I declined. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. That room wasn't mine anymore. Maybe it never had been. Instead, I packed the few things I still kept in my locker. A worn stethoscope. A photo of me and Mark at a lake somewhere in Vermont back when things were quieter. I stared at it longer than I meant to. I didn't text him. I didn't wait for him to find me. He found me anyway, near the hospital's rear exit, hands in his coat pockets like a schoolboy who just failed a test he never studied for. "She's not coming back," he said. "I know." He nodded once. They asked if I wanted to submit a statement. I didn't. That's fine. We stood in silence. He glanced at the boxes in my arms. "So, this is goodbye?" I didn't answer that directly. I just looked at him and said, "I hope one day you stop being afraid of who you are when she's not looking." I walked away before he could respond. Jason met me for coffee near the campus bookstore. He slid a small USB drive across the table. "Final copy, cleaned, encrypted. Everything you gave them and more. Keep it," I said, "for whoever comes next." He smiled, weary but proud. "You did more than win. You made it stop." I boarded the train out of Boston that afternoon. One bag, one laptop, one new job offer waiting in a city with fewer glass offices and more sun. A community clinic where the stakes were still high, but the power plays didn't wear pearl earrings. My new office smelled like paint and possibility. Second floor, corner window, a chipped desk that needed sanding, and a ficus that had seen better days. I dropped my bag on the floor, exhaled, and opened the top drawer. There it was, a sticky note. "If you ever come back, we'll be ready to listen the first time." M. Clark Boston still lived in my bones like a stubborn phantom. Even weeks after I left, I caught myself navigating crowds as if someone in a navy blazer might step out and clip my wings again. Old habits die last. The new clinic in Providence didn't have a boardroom. It had chipped floors and vinyl chairs, and a break room that smelled faintly like burnt toast no matter what time of day it was. But patients came in through the front door smiling. They left with follow-up cards and the comfort of someone remembering their name. No politics, just people. Still, even here I hadn't fully settled. Sometimes I would find myself staring at the door, expecting Evelyn to walk through it with a clipboard and smile that was a scalpel wrapped in pearls. But it wasn't her I kept expecting. It was Mark. I hadn't heard from him since the day we stood beneath the hospital exit awning, under a sky too blue for grief. We had shared too much to pretend it had been nothing, and too little to save what was already hollow. Until the letter arrived. It came not by email, but by mail. Ink on thick linen paper, his handwriting looping and messy like he always wrote too fast to catch himself. "Claire, I didn't speak then because I didn't know what to say. That's not an excuse. When you stood up to her, when you stood up for Lydia, for the others, I saw something I couldn't look away from. Not because it was foreign, but because I'd buried that part of myself years ago. I was afraid. I still am. I spent a decade learning how to stay still in her shadow. You taught me what it looks like to step out. I'm sorry I wasn't brave with you. I don't expect forgiveness. But if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. This time, fully awake. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I went for a walk. Providence was quieter than Boston. Smaller, slower. But that day, every corner felt like a checkpoint I had to pass to earn something unnamed. I thought about the girl I used to be when I first entered medical school. Eager, boundless, untouched by politics or power. She would have called Mark back in an instant. She would have believed in restoration, not boundaries. But I wasn't her anymore. I was someone who had watched a woman in power forge silence into currency. Someone who had stood in front of a panel and chosen truth over safety. Someone who knew now. Not all reconciliations are necessary. I sat by the river as dusk bled into the sky. In my pocket, the letter warmed against my palm. I didn't hate him. I didn't love him anymore either. What we had wasn't ruined. It had simply expired. Like a prescription that had done its job but couldn't be refilled. When I got home that night, I didn't write back. I packed the letter carefully, placed it in a folder marked Archives, and slid it behind a row of tax forms and old resumes. Then I called someone else. Jason answered on the second ring. "You're alive," he said. "Was beginning to think Providence had swallowed you whole." "Only slightly," I said, smiling. He paused. "You sound lighter." "I think I am." There was a beat of silence. "I got a call," he said. "From Beltran. She's considering going public, journal op-ed or podcast. I told her you'd probably support it." "Absolutely," I said. "Let her lead. I'll back her however she needs." "And Evelyn?" "I haven't heard anything." "You will," Jason murmured. "Systems like that don't crumble quietly. Someone always tries to sweep the dust back under the rug. Then we stay ready." "I like the new you." "I'm not new," I said. "Just finally visible." We talked another 20 minutes about Beltran, about a new attending at Boston Central who'd already begun questioning review processes. Tiny ripples, Jason called them. But I knew better. They were fault lines. After we hung up, I opened my laptop. Not for work, but for myself. A blank document blinked at me, white and expectant. I typed 3 words at the top. Soft is strong. It wasn't a manifesto, just a reminder. I wrote for an hour, not about Evelyn or Mark or even Lydia. I wrote about the moments in between, about the tiny acts of refusal that no one claps for. The way I'd kept showing up for patients even when everything else had collapsed. The morning I braided my own hair in the mirror and whispered, "You are still here." The last line came to me slowly, like light crawling through fog. They tried to teach me silence was safe. But truth, even whispered, makes better armor. I saved the file and titled it, "Not for Anyone." But I knew that someday it might be. The next morning, I arrived early at the clinic. The sky was still stitched with stars. One of the interns, Mia, was already there. Wide-eyed, scribbling notes in a chart she didn't yet fully understand. "You're early," I said. She jumped slightly. "Oh, sorry, just wanted to prep for Mrs. Downs. Her glucose levels were weird yesterday." I smiled. "Want to go over the numbers together?" She beamed like I'd handed her the key to the city. We sat at the desk in the back corner. I let her lead. She stumbled a few times, fumbled a reference, apologized too much. But her mind was sharp, her heart steady. When we finished, she looked up and said, "Doctor Monroe, did you ever feel like you weren't meant to be in medicine?" I paused, then nodded. "All the time." "What made you stay?" I thought of Evelyn's office, of that cold hearing room, of Lydia's ghost on a printed page, of Jason's steady voice, of sticky notes and burnt toast and people who still wanted to learn. "I stopped staying for the title," I said, "and started staying for the people." She blinked, smiled. In that moment, I saw myself again, not as I'd been, but as I could become. Not louder, just clearer. And when she returned to her notes, scribbling fiercely in blue ink, I stepped into the hallway, just for a breath, and let the silence settle. This time, it didn't feel like erasure. It felt like peace. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the truth, and that was louder than anything Evelyn had ever silenced. Justice didn't come with applause, but with consequence, and it arrived right on time for the one who thought she was untouchable. Like the final breath before dawn, truth doesn't need permission to rise. Because when injustice is met with unwavering courage, the verdict doesn't just end a chapter. It rewrites the rules. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to help truth echo even louder.